The note fell straight into my lap when I opened his Bible. It wasn't the sound that froze me. It was the handwriting. My husband's. 4 words that didn't belong to Faith or Mercy. If she discovers the truth, kill her. I looked toward the hallway. My grandchildren were asleep just a few feet away. The clock ticked like a heartbeat, and for a second I thought I heard footsteps outside. That night, I learned what real fear feels like. And I swear to you, everything that happened after this moment will make you question how far a woman can go to save the life she thought was already over. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I used to believe that silence was the same as peace. I spent most of my life keeping everything neat, calm, and predictable. Dinner ready by 6, prayers said before bed, smiles practiced for the church crowd on Sundays. People said our home looked like a picture in a magazine, but no one ever asked what it felt like to live inside that picture. I was 68 the year the truth fell into my lap. Old enough to have stopped expecting surprises, young enough to still pretend I was fine. My husband, David, was the kind of man who spoke softly but controlled everything without ever raising his voice. He decided what we gave, what we kept, what we said, even how we prayed. He didn't need to shout. His silence was enough to make everyone behave. I had learned to adapt. It's strange how a woman can shrink herself to fit inside a life that doesn't have space for her. I taught literature for 30 years, told my students that words have power, but somewhere along the way, I forgot that power was mine too. Then came that night, the Bible, the note, the words that split my world in half. For a moment, I thought it had to be something else, a line from a sermon, a warning from another time. But when I touched the paper, I knew. The ink had that slight smudge at the end of every R, David's unmistakable mark. I didn't cry. I didn't even scream. I just sat there listening to the house breathe around me, and the thought that kept repeating was simple and terrifying. He knows I know. The next sound came from outside, a soft knock against the front door, 3 slow knocks. I remember my heart stalling mid-beat. My hands went cold. I looked at the hallway again, saw the faint light under the grandchildren's door, and thought, if this is the end, at least they won't see it. When I opened the door, the porch was empty. Only rain and shadows. I closed it quietly, locked it twice, and pressed my back against the wood. That was the moment I understood what it meant to be truly alone. Not just without company, but without safety. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen until sunrise, watching the light change on the walls, the note folded on the table beside my tea. By morning, I had already decided what I had to do. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to scream for help. I was going to find out why a man who once promised to love me until death would write something like that inside a Bible. People think courage is loud, but it isn't. It's quiet. It's a woman staring at her reflection, realizing that the person she sees has been gone for years, and deciding to bring her back. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love hearing how far these stories travel. Word count, 818. Awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay, voices of Roteiro disse, great, ready to continue. Please confirm. Would you like me to move on to section 2, the silent house, keeping the same cinematic tone, tension under calm, Eleanor's inner voice sharp and intimate, slowly revealing the hidden control and unspoken abuse that defined her marriage? Você disse, só inicie, depois do ok, voices of Roteiro, disse, section 2. The silent house morning light used to look gentle in our home, sliding across the lace curtains, touching the framed photos on the wall. But that morning, after the note, every corner looked staged, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The smell of coffee, the ticking clock, the polished silverware, everything too perfect, too quiet. David came down the stairs wearing his usual calm, the kind that had fooled everyone for decades. "You were up early," he said, without really asking. He kissed my cheek, the way he always did, a gesture rehearsed so many times it had no warmth left. I smiled the way I was trained to smile, small, polite, harmless. Grace and Oliver ran in, laughing, arguing over which one had left the toothpaste cap off. Their energy filled the kitchen like sunlight, and for a moment I could breathe again. I handed them pancakes, listened to their stories, and tried not to look at the Bible still sitting on the counter, its pages closed, but heavy with what I now knew. David watched them too, his eyes softening the way they always did around the grandchildren. To anyone else, he looked like a proud grandfather. To me, he looked like a man performing goodness for an audience. That was his gift. He could wrap his darkness and decency so tight that people mistook it for grace. After breakfast, he left for work, or at least that was what he said. I stood by the window until his car disappeared. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the kind that presses on your chest, like the air before a storm. I started cleaning the kitchen just to keep my hands busy. Every sound felt sharper, the clink of dishes, the rush of water, the creak of floorboards above me. It's strange, the things you start noticing when fear moves in. The faint scratches on the doorframe you've never seen before. The stack of unopened mail that suddenly feels suspicious. The locked drawer in his desk that used to mean nothing. I told myself not to look, not yet. But the thought grew like a pulse. I tried to keep the day normal for the children. We played cards, baked cookies, read stories. Grace asked why I seemed distracted, and I told her I was just tired. She looked at me with that quiet intuition children have, as if she could sense the truth pressing against my ribs. That evening, David returned carrying flowers. Yellow roses, my favorite, though he had never once remembered that before. "For you," he said, smiling. I thanked him, pretending not to notice that the bouquet was trembling slightly in his hands. Was it guilt, or the thrill of control? He asked about my day, about the grandchildren, about the guests who were planning to stay next week. His tone was kind, but every question felt like a test. I answered carefully, each word weighed before leaving my mouth. The conversation was a chess game we both pretended wasn't happening. After dinner, he read the newspaper while I pretended to watch television. The Bible was still on the side table. I couldn't look at it, but I couldn't move it either. That book had become a living thing, breathing in the corner of the room. I thought about burning it, but part of me wanted it to stay, as proof that I hadn't imagined everything. When the house went dark, I checked every lock twice, then stood in the hallway watching the doors of my grandchildren's room. They slept peacefully, unaware that their grandmother was standing guard like a soldier waiting for a war that had already begun. In that silence, I made myself a promise. I would not be the quiet wife anymore. Whatever truth that note pointed to, I would find it. And when I did, I wouldn't hide it, not even from myself. Because the worst kind of prison isn't built of walls. It's built of obedience. Word count, 8-24. Awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay. Voices of Roteiro disse, Section 3, The Night of the Discovery. That night began like any other. Rain brushed softly against the windows. The sound of my grandchildren breathing down the hallway gave the house a heartbeat, and David was in his study, humming low as he sorted papers. I told him I would read for a while before bed. My voice didn't shake, though my thoughts were already spinning in places I couldn't name. When I closed our bedroom door, the quiet felt heavy. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the Bible resting on the nightstand. It was the same book that had sat there since our wedding day, the one he opened every Sunday morning before church. I used to believe that book made him better than he was, that it kept us safe. But faith looks different when you realize someone can hide behind it. I reached for the Bible again, meaning only to move it. The weight of it surprised me. The paper was cold, the leather warm from his hands. I lifted the cover, and something small slipped free. The same folded note I had found before. But this time, I was ready for it. I opened it again under the yellow light of the bedside lamp, hoping maybe the words had changed. They hadn't. If she discovers the truth, kill her. Every letter curved the same way he wrote our grocery lists, our Christmas cards. I touched the ink, half expecting it to smear onto my fingers, but it was dry, set in place like a warning that had been waiting. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the clock. Then something inside me, the part that had survived every quiet insult, every moment of manipulation, every night of feeling small, woke up. I wasn't a frightened wife anymore. I was a woman who had been given evidence. I slipped the note back between the pages, careful to remember exactly where it had fallen, and closed the Bible. My reflection in the mirror across the room startled me. My eyes looked older than I remembered. Not weaker, just older, like I finally saw myself clearly. Downstairs, I could hear David moving around, drawers opening, a door closing. I wondered what secrets those drawers held. I imagined letters, receipts, names of people who might know the story behind that note. For the first time, curiosity outweighed fear. I walked quietly to the study, barefoot on the wooden floor, the Bible pressed to my chest. The door was half open and light spilled into the hallway. David wasn't there. His jacket hung on the chair, his reading glasses on the desk. Papers were spread out like a map of another life. I looked at the desk drawer, the one I'd never touched in decades. It was locked. I could almost hear my own heartbeat when I pulled at the handle. The sound was sharp, like a breath breaking. Footsteps echoed from the porch outside. A knock, slow and deliberate, rolled through the house. I froze. Not again. The same pattern as before. 3 knocks, a pause, another. I set the Bible on the desk and forced myself toward the door. My hand trembled on the handle. When I opened it, the porch light flickered. No one stood there, just darkness, rain, and the smell of damp earth. But there, at the edge of the doormat, something glimmered, a key. An old brass key, heavy and cold when I picked it up. I didn't know what it opened, but I knew who had left it. I turned the key over in my palm, and the rain washed the last trace of hesitation away. Whatever truth he thought would destroy me, I was done hiding from it. Word count, 826. Awaiting OK. Você disse, OK Voices of Rotero, dice. Section 4. A terrifying knock. The storm didn't stop that night. It grew louder, angrier, as if the sky itself wanted to warn me. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. I sat at the kitchen table with the key beside the folded note, both glinting in the lamplight like 2 pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to solve. Every few minutes, I thought I heard movement upstairs. A floorboard sighing, a drawer closing. I told myself it was the wind, that David had already gone to bed. But the air felt charged, too alert. It was the same sensation you get right before lightning hits, when your body knows before your mind does that something is about to change. Then came the sound that made my whole body lock, a single, heavy knock at the front door. Not a timid tap, a full, deliberate strike. I felt it in my chest. I didn't move at first. The rain hammered harder against the windows. Another knock followed. 3 slow beats, steady, patient. The same rhythm as before. I thought of the note again. If she discovers the truth, kill her. I stood, my knees weak but my steps careful. Every instinct screamed to wake the children, to call someone, to hide. But something colder took over, a strange, controlled calm. I wasn't going to run, not this time. When I reached the door, I hesitated only for a second before unlocking it. The wood creaked as I pulled it open. Rain swept in, cold against my skin. No one stood there. Only darkness and the faint outline of David's truck at the end of the driveway, glistening under the storm. I stepped outside, letting the rain soak through my robe. The world was all sound, thunder, water, my heart. On the porch railing, something white was pressed flat by the rain. I reached for it, another piece of paper. The ink had bled, but I could still read one sentence. You were never supposed to know. A car door slammed. My head jerked toward the sound. The truck's headlights flared to life, cutting through the rain. Then, just as suddenly, they went dark again. I couldn't see if he was inside. I turned back into the house, locked the door, and backed away until my shoulders hit the wall. The clock on the mantel ticked louder than before. Every sound inside the house had multiplied. The pipes, the wind, the thunder outside. I could swear I heard breathing that wasn't mine. I walked to the hallway, stopping by my grandchildren's door. I opened it just enough to see them sleeping, both curled beneath the same blanket. Grace had her hand resting on Oliver's shoulder, protective even in sleep. That sight anchored me. Whatever storm waited outside or within, I would not let it touch them. I went back downstairs, closed every curtain, and sat with the Bible, the note, and the new piece of paper laid out before me. Together, they felt like a message, a story that someone wanted buried, and I was the one who had dug it up. When the clock struck midnight, the thunder stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I stared at the brass key still lying on the table. My reflection in it was small and distorted, like a woman I barely knew. If fear was meant to paralyze me, it failed. What I felt instead was resolve. I gathered both notes, the key, and whispered to the empty room, "If he wrote those words, I'll make sure he answers for them." The storm outside began to fade. But inside me, something far stronger was waking. Word count, 829. Awaiting, OK. Você disse, OK, Voices of Roteiro disse. Section 5. A glimpse of the handwriting. The next morning broke pale and quiet, as if the storm had scrubbed the world clean. But the calm didn't touch me. My head was heavy from a night without sleep, my eyes drawn again and again to the papers on the kitchen table. I sat there with a cup of untouched coffee, staring at the sentences that had ruined the sound of my own heartbeat. If she discovers the truth, kill her. You were never supposed to know. I spread both notes side by side. The second one was written in the same hand. The letters curved with that practiced confidence David carried into every part of his life. The same loops, the same narrow spacing. It was him. There was no denying it now. And yet, I found myself tracing each letter with my finger, searching for something. Hesitation, a difference, anything that could mean someone else had forged it. But the truth doesn't care what we want it to be. It only sits there, waiting for us to stop pretending. I stood and opened the curtains. The yard glistened with leftover rain. David's truck was gone. The air in the house felt thin. When I turned back to the table, I saw one of the old grocery lists tucked under the salt shaker, his handwriting again. For years, I'd loved those lists, his neat rows of milk, bread, coffee, Eleanor's tea. Seeing them now beside those violent words made my stomach twist. The same pen that once wrote about what we needed to live had written about how I might die. The thought came so suddenly it startled me. What truth was I not supposed to discover? I went to the study. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, cutting the room into stripes. The air smelled faintly of tobacco and paper. His desk was still locked, but the brass key in my pocket felt heavier with every breath. I held it to the drawer. The metal slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting. For a second, I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to believe that love could explain everything. But love that demands ignorance isn't love. It's ownership. The drawer opened with a slow groan. Inside, stacks of envelopes, old photographs, and a thin leather journal lay in neat order. My hands trembled as I lifted the journal. Inside were notes written in the same slanted script, fragments of phone numbers, women's names, dates, sums of money. My name appeared only once, next to a single word: risk. The room tilted. I had lived with this man for decades, shared meals, raised children, grown old beside him. And yet, here on paper, he had reduced me to a liability. A knock at the door startled me. My heart lurched, but it was just Grace's voice calling, "Grandma, are you okay?" I hid the journal under a stack of folders and forced my voice steady. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Go play with your brother." She lingered a moment. Then her footsteps faded. I sat back in the chair, shaking. Every part of me wanted to protect them from this world that had just opened under our feet. I looked around the study, the walls lined with books about morality, devotion, righteousness. Words that once felt holy now looked like camouflage. That's when I realized how deep his control ran. Even his handwriting had become a weapon, binding me to the illusion that he was still the man I loved. But the spell had broken. The note, the key, the drawer, they had all worked together like a cruel sermon written just for me. And now that I had read it, There was no going back. I placed the 2 notes inside the journal, locked the drawer again, and whispered a promise I hadn't made in years. No more silence. Because once you recognize the handwriting of betrayal, you can't mistake it for love again. Word count, 843. Awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay, voices of Roteiro disse, Section 6, pretending normalcy. By the next morning, I had learned the art of breathing around fear. It was like holding a cracked vase together with your hands, careful not to let a single piece fall. From the outside, nothing looked different. The coffee brewed, the radio played soft gospel, and the world pretended to be ordinary. David came into the kitchen wearing his work jacket, his tie half loosened, smiling like a man with no ghosts to hide. He kissed the top of my head and said, "You look tired." His tone was kind, almost tender. But beneath that voice, I heard the same edge I'd heard my whole life. Control, disguised as concern. "I couldn't sleep," I said. "The storm kept me up." He nodded, poured himself coffee, and sat across from me. The Bible rested open beside his cup, as if it belonged there, untouched by sin. My eyes drifted toward it, and I forced them away before he noticed. Grace and Oliver ran in, still in pajamas, arguing about who would feed the cat. Their laughter filled the room with a life too bright for secrets. I smiled for them. That smile, the one I had perfected over decades, was the only armor I had left. David looked at the children and said, "Your grandmother makes the best pancakes in the county." He always said that when he wanted me quiet, wrapped me in praise, then moved the conversation wherever he pleased. While they ate, I watched him. His hands, steady as always, his sleeves neatly rolled. I searched for any trace of guilt, any tremor in his movements, but there was nothing. He was the same man the world adored, calm, generous, righteous, and that terrified me more than the notes. After breakfast, he left for work. I waited by the window until his truck turned the corner, until the sound of the engine disappeared. Only then did I exhale. The house sank into silence, thick and listening. I cleaned to fill the hours, wiped the counters, folded laundry, ironed his shirts. The rhythm of chores had always soothed me, but now it felt like pretending to be a ghost in my own life. The walls knew more than I did. When the phone rang, I nearly dropped a plate. It was my daughter, checking in about the weekend. I told her everything was fine. She said David had mentioned we were planning a church retreat soon. I didn't answer. I just let her talk, nodding when silence demanded a response. After she hung up, I sat by the kitchen table and stared at the phone. He was still weaving stories about us, a perfect marriage, a faithful home. I was just the background character who smiled on cue. The rest of the day unfolded in slow motion. Grace painted on the porch while Oliver built a fort in the living room. Their laughter was my reminder of why I couldn't fall apart. I moved through the house, memorizing small details, the photograph of David holding Grace as a baby, the small dent in the wall from when he once slammed a door too hard. Every mark, every object, carried its own quiet confession. By evening, I cooked his favorite dinner. Habit, I told myself. Safety. When he came home, the smell of stew filled the air. He smiled, set his jacket down, and said, "You always know what I need." The words cut deeper than he knew. We ate in near silence. He asked about the grandchildren's school, about church. I nodded, offered polite answers, careful not to let my eyes linger too long on his. I could feel him watching me, though, reading me the way he read sermons, looking for sin between the lines. Later that night, when he finally fell asleep, I lay awake beside him. His breathing was steady, slow, innocent. I studied his face in the dark, the man everyone saw, and the stranger I was only beginning to meet. Pretending normalcy is a dangerous thing. It makes you start to believe your own lies. But beneath my quiet, a plan was already forming, the smallest spark of rebellion, a whisper inside me saying, "You don't have to live like this anymore." And once a whisper like that begins, there's no silencing it. Word count, 836, awaiting okay. Você disse, okay, voices of Roteiro. GC, Section 7, The Hidden Drawer. When David left the next morning, his usual calm was almost theatrical. He lingered at the door, asked about dinner plans, kissed my cheek again, and told me to rest. I nodded, holding his gaze long enough to feel the question rise between us. Did he suspect I knew? His eyes flickered for just a second before he smiled, the same smile he used on strangers. Then the door closed, and I was alone. Silence settled over the house like dust. Grace and Oliver were at school, and for the first time in days, I didn't have to pretend. My hands trembled as I poured myself coffee. The moment I tasted it, I knew what I was about to do. I walked to his study. That room had always been off limits. The smell of cedar and tobacco, the faint hum of the old desk lamp. Even the air felt disciplined, trained to obey him. I stood in the doorway, remembering all the times he had told me not to disturb his papers, his sermons, his work. I had obeyed every time until now. The key was cold in my pocket. I turned it over once, twice, then slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly, like it had always belonged to my hand. The drawer gave a reluctant sigh when it opened, as if it too had been waiting. Inside were envelopes stacked in careful order, tied with twine, each one labeled with dates, initials, or single words: donations, travel, expenses, Lydia. My breath caught at that name. I pulled the bundle marked Lydia to the top and untied it. Photographs spilled out, pictures of a woman I had seen only in passing years ago, smiling beside David outside a church event. She was younger than I remembered, maybe in her 30s then, her eyes bright but uncertain. One photo showed her holding a book I recognized, his Bible, the same one that had held the note. Beneath the photos was a letter. The paper was soft from age, folded too many times. His handwriting again, this time gentler. You have nothing to fear. I've handled it. She'll never know. My fingers went numb. I sat back in the chair, the weight of that single sentence pressing down. All the small disappearances suddenly made sense. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the moments he flinched when I mentioned certain names. He had lived 2 lives under one roof, one for God and one for himself. I opened another envelope labeled bank. Inside were receipts for cash withdrawals, large sums that had no reason to exist, and behind those, a single page torn from a notebook. In someone else's handwriting, a short message: she's asking questions. Handle it. My breath hitched. The words felt like a whisper from the dark. I didn't know who wrote them, but I knew exactly who they were about. I pushed the drawer closed, then stopped. There was another line where the wood didn't quite meet. I pressed it, and the bottom shifted. A hidden compartment. I pried it open with a letter opener. Inside was a small cassette tape and a keychain with the initials LM. For a long time, I just stared at them, unable to move. The tape was unmarked. I didn't have the courage to play it yet, not while my hands shook like this. I placed everything back exactly as I found it, except for one thing: the photograph of Lydia holding his Bible. I slipped it into my pocket, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. When I finally stepped out of the study, the light through the window had changed. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a crime scene built out of prayers and polished wood. That night, as I tucked the grandchildren into bed, Grace asked, "Grandma, why do you look sad?" I kissed her forehead and said, "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm just thinking about what truth costs. Because I already knew, the truth never comes free. It demands everything you thought you could keep." Word count, 844. Awaiting OK. Você disse OK Voices of Roteiro, disse, Section 8, The Other Woman. I waited until David left again before I took out the photograph. Lydia Morrison. Even saying her name felt strange, like pronouncing a secret I had no right to know. In the picture, she stood beside him in front of the church, smiling nervously. His hand rested on her shoulder, a casual touch to anyone else. But to me, it was confession. I had seen her before, years ago. She was a substitute teacher for one semester when I was still working at the high school. Quiet, polite, a little shy. The kind of woman people overlooked, just like me. I remembered how David once dropped by the school to pick me up for lunch. Now I understood what he had really been doing there. The betrayal stung, but there was something worse than jealousy. Recognition. I looked at her face and saw a woman who had probably believed every promise he made. I spent the morning walking through the house like a ghost, holding that photograph between my fingers. Every time I looked at it, I saw more details, the way his wedding ring caught the light, the way her eyes looked unsure. The moment was supposed to be innocent, but the air around them seemed charged. I found myself whispering, "Did you know about me, Lydia?" Then, quieter, "Did you believe you were the only one?" For the first time in my life, I realized that rage and empathy could coexist. I hated her for existing in my story, yet I pitied her for being caught in his. By afternoon, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, the Bible on the table beside me. My grandchildren were drawing with chalk on the walkway. Their laughter floated through the warm air, mixing with the distant hum of cicadas. Life, in its strange cruelty, refused to stop. I opened the Bible again, half expecting another note to fall out. Nothing did. But as I turned the pages, I noticed faint indentations on the paper, as if someone had written over it before. The impression of words, erased, but still there. I held it up to the light. The shadows of letters appeared, Lydia and safe. Safe from what? From me? From him? That evening, I couldn't eat. David talked about church events, the new pastor, the upcoming charity drive. His words were a blur of righteousness. I nodded at the right times, careful to keep my hands still. Inside, I felt like my skin was shrinking. When he mentioned Lydia's name casually, said he'd seen her name on a prayer list, my fork froze midair. He didn't look at me when he said it. He just continued eating, as if testing the sound of her name in front of me. "Do you remember her?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "She was kind." He smiled faintly. "Kindness can be dangerous. People misunderstand it." He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine. For a moment, the air between us turned cold. I couldn't tell if he was warning me or confessing. Later that night, after he fell asleep, I went back to the study and searched again. I found nothing new, only the faint smell of his cologne and the echo of my own heartbeat. But the unease grew sharper. I could feel Lydia's presence everywhere, in his clothes, his words, the way he avoided certain questions. When I finally lay down, I couldn't close my eyes. My mind replayed that photograph, the tremor in her smile, the note in the Bible, the hidden drawer. Everything connected. I didn't hate Lydia anymore. I hated the illusion that had trapped both of us, the idea that love required silence. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I whispered into the dark, "He hurt you too, didn't he?" Because deep down, I already knew the answer. Word count, 835. Awaiting OK, você diz, OK Voices of Roteiro DC, Section 9, The Plan to Escape. The morning after that uneasy dinner, I woke before dawn. The air was cold, still heavy with the scent of David's cologne that lingered on the sheets. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me. He slept peacefully, as if he hadn't built his life on lies. I turned my head and watched him for a long moment. His face was calm, almost boyish in the half-light. The same face that had once made me feel safe now filled me with quiet dread. I thought about how easily people can mistake stillness for goodness. How a calm voice can hide cruelty if you let it. That was the moment I decided I couldn't stay still anymore. I rose carefully, slipped into my robe, and stepped out into the hallway. The floorboards creaked softly under my feet, the same sound that had once meant home. Now it was a warning. In the kitchen, I made coffee and took out a small notebook from the drawer, the kind I used to keep grocery lists in. I wrote 3 things: money, papers, children. Then I drew a line under it and added one more word: plan. I didn't know what the plan was yet, but naming it gave me power. Fear can't survive when it's written down. It starts to look smaller, like a shadow under light. When David left for work, I waited until the truck's sound disappeared down the road before I started. I went through every cabinet, every drawer, counting cash, hiding small bills in a flour tin. I copied important documents, birth certificates, property deeds, anything I could find that tied me to this house. I placed the copies in an envelope and tucked it behind the lining of my old suitcase in the attic. No one ever looked there. Then I cleaned. Not because I needed to, but because it gave me time to think. Every corner of that house carried a memory. Christmas mornings, birthdays, prayers at the dinner table. I didn't want to destroy those moments. I just wanted to stop pretending they were built on love. The hardest part was deciding how to keep the grandchildren safe. Grace and Oliver had grown to love this house, this town. I couldn't take them away, but I also couldn't leave them in danger. I decided to wait until the weekend, when their parents would pick them up. After that, it would be just me and David again, and that's when I'd act. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch with my notebook hidden under a magazine. David joined me with his coffee. "You're quiet lately," he said. "Something wrong?" "Just tired," I answered. He studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You should rest. You worry too much." The irony almost made me laugh. I wanted to ask if he ever worried about me, about the notes, about the lies, but I said nothing. Instead, I nodded, pretending to accept his kindness. After dinner, I told him I'd be visiting the library the next morning. He didn't question it. That was my opening. The library wasn't where I was going. There was a lawyer's office across from it, one that handled small businesses and property disputes. I'd seen the nameplate on my walks. That night, I hid the photograph of Lydia and the notes inside the lining of my handbag. The Bible stayed on the nightstand. I wanted him to think I'd left it untouched. Lying in bed, I whispered my plan to myself like a prayer. Copy the evidence. Talk to someone. Protect the children. Then leave. The room was dark, but for the first time in years, the darkness didn't scare me. It felt like a curtain lifting, revealing the stage beneath it. In the faint glow from the window, I saw my reflection in the mirror, a woman I hadn't recognized in a long time. She looked older, yes, but stronger too. There was something fierce in her eyes. And as I closed mine, one truth became clear. Surviving wasn't enough anymore. I wanted my life back. Word count, 842. Awaiting, OK. Você diz, OK Voices of Roteiro. DC, Section 10, A Stranger's Visit. The day started with sunlight instead of rain, but it didn't feel any lighter. The air outside the kitchen window was still, the kind that makes you listen for something, even when there's nothing to hear. I moved through my morning slowly, pretending the calm was real. The Bible stayed on the nightstand. The notes, the photo, and the plan stayed tucked in my handbag. By noon, I had already called the lawyer's office to ask about a meeting. The secretary said she could fit me in later that week. That gave me time to prepare. Time I didn't know would vanish by the end of the day. I was baking bread when the knock came. A single, hesitant knock. Not like David's firm rhythm or the storm's ghostly pounding. This one sounded uncertain, human. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to the door. A woman stood on the porch, pale under the sun, her clothes damp with sweat. Her hair was uncombed, her eyes red and swollen from crying. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. Then I saw the photograph in my mind, the same tired eyes, the same mouth that once smiled beside my husband. "Lydia?" I whispered. She nodded, clutching something wrapped in a blanket. Her voice trembled when she said, "Please, can I come in?" I stepped aside. My heart thudded so hard I thought she could hear it. Lydia crossed the threshold like someone stepping onto forbidden ground. She looked around the kitchen, her gaze brushing over every detail. The counters, the photos, the familiar space that had once belonged to her fantasies. "I shouldn't be here," she said. But I didn't know where else to go. I looked down at the bundle in her arms. A baby, maybe 2 months old, sleeping against her chest. His tiny hand peeked through the blanket, fingers curled like a promise. "Is that—" I stopped myself. "Yes," she said softly. "His." The room tilted. My knees nearly gave out, but I gripped the counter. David had told me nothing, not a word. He'd carried on praying at our table while this woman raised his child in secret. Lydia's eyes filled with tears. He told me he'd take care of everything, that you'd never find out, but then he stopped calling. I think he's gone, Eleanor. I think he's hiding from both of us. I sank into a chair. The world was spinning too slowly to feel real. She stood across from me, rocking the baby, her lips trembling. "I'm not here to ask for money," she said. "I just need safety. I thought maybe you'd understand." Understand. The word pierced me. It would have been easier to hate her, easier to throw her out, but looking at her, the hollow cheeks, the fear in her eyes, I saw myself. Another woman betrayed, discarded, forced to carry the weight of his sin. I gestured to the seat across from me. "Sit down," I said quietly. Her shoulders sagged with relief. She sat, clutching the baby. We stayed in silence for a while, the only sound the soft breathing of the child. "What's his name?" I asked finally. "Noah," she said. "It means rest." The irony didn't escape either of us. I poured her water, set bread on the table. She ate like someone who hadn't in days. Between small bites, she told me pieces of the story. How David had promised her a new life, how he said he'd leave me when the time was right, how his generosity had turned into distance, then threats. "He said I was ruining everything," she whispered, "that he couldn't risk losing what he'd built. He told me to disappear." I swallowed hard. The same tone, the same control. It was all familiar. "He told me I'd never understand," I said. "Now I do." When the baby stirred, she lifted him gently. He opened his eyes, the same shade of green as David's. Something inside me cracked open. But instead of anger, I felt something unexpected. Pity, protection, maybe even grace. Lydia's voice broke. "I didn't know where else to go. Please don't send me away." "I won't," I said. The words came before I had time to think. But once spoken, they felt right. That night, as I laid an extra blanket on the couch for her and placed a basket beside it for the baby, I realized the strangest truth of all. The woman I should have hated had just become the one person in this house I could trust. Word count, 843. Awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay, Voices of Roteiro. Disse, Section 11, A Truth Unfolds. The house looked different the next morning, softer somehow. Sunlight touched the floorboards where Lydia's bag rested, the baby's quiet coos replacing the usual silence. It felt like another world had entered through that front door, fragile, frightened, but alive. I made coffee while Lydia sat at the kitchen table, her eyes half closed with exhaustion. Noah slept in her arms, his tiny breath steady against her chest. The sight pulled something deep inside me, something I hadn't felt in years, the instinct to protect. "Did he know where you were going?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't think so. The last time I saw him, he told me to forget him, said it would be better for everyone." Her voice cracked. "He looked terrified, Eleanor, like someone had found out something about him, something big." I slid a cup of coffee toward her. "Something bigger than an affair?" Her eyes lifted to mine. "Much bigger." She told me about the donations he'd collected through the church, money meant for families in need that somehow never reached them. How he'd asked her to help with the paperwork when she worked at the school office. How she'd signed things without understanding what they meant. When I realized the money wasn't going where he said, I confronted him, she said. He told me I was mistaken. Then the next day, I got the note under my door, the one that said, if she discovers the truth, kill her. My breath caught, the same words, the same handwriting. "So it wasn't just about you," I said. "No, it was about both of us, about anyone who got too close." I stared at her, feeling the pieces locked together like an ugly puzzle. The missing funds, the threats, the fear that had crept into our house long before I'd named it. Lydia's voice was small when she asked, "Do you think he could really hurt someone?" I wanted to say no, to defend the man I once believed in. But the memory of that note, the tremor in his hand when he brought me flowers, the quiet control in his every word. They all told me the answer. Yes, I said. I think he already has. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Then what do we do? I looked toward the hallway where the grandchildren's laughter echoed faintly from the living room. We survive, I said. We don't let him take anything else from us. We spent the rest of the morning piecing together details, where he went on his business trips, who he met with, what he told her about the money. Every story matched a moment I remembered, every lie layered perfectly over my daily life. At one point, Lydia hesitated and said, "There's something else." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a photograph of David standing beside another man, both smiling in front of a small office building. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written a date and a single word: transfer. "I found this in his car," she said, after he told me to disappear. I turned the photo over, tracing the word with my thumb. Transfer of what? Money, maybe, or something worse. The baby stirred, and she rocked him gently. Her exhaustion hung in the air like a shared confession. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "If I'd known who he really was, I would have stayed away." I shook my head. "Don't apologize for being lied to. We both believed the same story." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. The noise made her flinch, and I realized she'd been living in fear for much longer than I had. That night, after she and Noah had fallen asleep in the guest room, I stood in the hallway, listening to the steady rhythm of the baby's breathing. It was the only sound that felt honest in this house. I went into David's study, turned on the lamp, and stared at the drawer I'd opened days before. The lock glinted under the light. I pressed my hand to the wood. If there was a truth big enough to destroy all of this, I was ready to find it. Because lies only hold power as long as we agree to keep them. Word count, 842, awaiting OK. Você disse OK, Voices of Rotero. Disse, Section 12. The Pact. The next morning, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen again, but this time it wasn't routine. It was strategy. Lydia sat across from me, her hair tied back, eyes still swollen from sleeplessness. The baby rested in a wicker basket near the table, swaddled in a blanket that used to belong to my grandchildren. Every sound he made reminded us why there was no turning back. Neither of us spoke for a while. Silence had become our shared language, a fragile kind of trust. When Lydia finally said, "We can't go to the police," it wasn't fear in her voice. It was certainty. "He has too many friends there," she added. "He knows people. He helped them with donations, favors, sermons. They'd listen to him before they'd ever believe us." I stirred my coffee slowly. "Then we'll find another way." Her eyes lifted to mine, uncertain. "You'd help me? After everything?" I nodded. He lied to both of us. The way I see it, that makes us the same kind of woman, the kind who deserves a chance to live free. The words surprised me. A few days ago, I couldn't have imagined saying them, but now they felt truer than anything I'd ever spoken. We spent the morning planning. Not revenge, survival. Lydia would stay here until we figured out where David had gone. I would handle the finances, gather proof of what he'd done, and protect the children from hearing even a whisper of it. "I can work," she said quickly. "I can clean, cook, whatever you need." "You don't have to earn your safety," I replied. "You already did that by surviving." She smiled weakly, and for the first time, I saw how young she still was. The kind of youth I had lost long ago to obedience. Later that afternoon, I brought her the photograph I'd found, the one of her holding his Bible. She stared at it for a long time. "He told me it was ours," she said, "that we should write prayers together." I didn't know he'd hidden something inside it. I could have told her that I'd found my own note between those same pages. But something stopped me. Maybe I wanted to protect her from the exact shape of his cruelty. Or maybe I just wasn't ready to hear the horror repeated aloud. Instead, I said, "He used that book to make us trust him. We'll use the truth to end him." That night, we cooked dinner together, a quiet meal that felt like ceremony. Grace and Oliver came by to pick up their school projects. They thought Lydia was an old friend visiting from church. Noah's tiny cries fascinated them, their faces soft with wonder. As they left, Grace turned to me and said, "You always take care of everyone, Grandma." I smiled, but her words pierced deep. She didn't know that this time, taking care of everyone meant protecting them from the man who shared their blood. After the children were gone, Lydia and I sat on the porch, the baby asleep between us. Fireflies drifted through the dusk. "I keep thinking he'll show up," she whispered, "that he'll knock on that door and tell us to forget this ever happened." "He might," I said, "but next time he won't find the same women waiting." We sat there in the dark, our fear giving way to something steadier. Resolve. It was strange how comfort could grow from the very thing that once destroyed you. "I don't know what comes next," Lydia said softly. "Then we decide what comes next," I answered. Together. For the first time since the note fell from that Bible, I felt a flicker of peace. Not safety, not yet, but the kind of calm that comes from reclaiming power inch by inch. Before going to bed, I wrote one line in my notebook. "We will not be afraid of him anymore." It wasn't a prayer, it was a promise. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without listening for footsteps. Word count 848. Awaiting OK. Você disse OK Voices of Roteiro, disse, Section 13, The Last Supper. He came back without warning. No phone call, no message, just the sound of his truck tires crunching on the gravel driveway as dusk settled over the house. The headlights washed through the kitchen window, slicing across the table where Lydia and I had just finished feeding Noah. My breath caught. Lydia froze, her spoon mid-air. "He's here," I whispered. The baby whimpered as if he could feel the air change. I told Lydia to take him upstairs and stay quiet. Her hands trembled, but she obeyed. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close before I turned toward the front door. When David walked in, he looked exactly the same, calm, polished, untouchable. He smiled like a man returning to a faithful wife, not one hiding from the wreckage of his lies. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "I didn't think you'd still be here." "Where else would I be?" I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the room, pausing on the second coffee cup still warm on the table. "Expecting company?" "I had a friend over," I said. "Someone who needed help." He gave a tight smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "You always did like rescuing people." I walked past him to the stove and stirred the pot of stew that was still simmering. "I made dinner," I said. "You're welcome to join me." His brow lifted slightly. "After all this time?" "After everything," I replied. We sat across from each other, the lamplight flickering between us. He reached for the bread, tore a piece, and ate. I watched his hands, steady, confident. The hands that had written those notes. The hands that had built the illusion of righteousness. "You've been quiet," he said after a few bites. "The children called, said you've been keeping to yourself." "I've been thinking," I said. "About what?" "The truth." His fork stopped midair. "The truth about what?" "About you," I said simply. "About us. About the woman you used, the money you stole, the lies you hid in the pages of that Bible." He stared at me for a long time, then set his fork down. The mask slipped. "You shouldn't have gone looking, and you shouldn't have given me reasons to." A faint laugh escaped him. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," I said. "I know about Lydia. I know about the notes. I know about the money you took in God's name." His face hardened. "You have no proof." I leaned back, meeting his gaze. "Not yet, but I will." The silence that followed was colder than any shout. He stood, pacing slowly, his shadow stretching across the wall. "You think people will believe you over me? You think they'll listen to the woman who's always been too fragile to finish a sentence without trembling?" I stood too. "You're right. They won't believe the fragile woman. That's why she doesn't exist anymore." His eyes narrowed. "What did you do?" I stopped being afraid. Something flickered in his face. Confusion, then anger. "You should be careful what you start, Eleanor. You never know how far it can go." "I know exactly how far it went," I said, my voice firm. "Far enough to bring a child into this world who deserves better than your shame." His expression froze. "You saw her," he said slowly. "You took her in." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth hung between us, heavy and alive. He exhaled sharply, grabbed his coat, and said, "You've made a mistake." "Maybe," I said, "but at least it's mine to make." He stopped at the door. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," I said quietly. "For you, it ends here." When the door slammed behind him, the sound echoed through the house like a final verdict. I sank into the chair, my hands shaking, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release. Upstairs, I heard the baby cry, and Lydia's soft voice soothing him. I looked at the table. 2 empty plates, 2 lives that would never meet again. It really was our last supper. Word count, 848. Awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay, Voices of Roteiro, disse, Section 14, The Collapse of the False Saint. The next few days unfolded in slow motion, as if the air itself was waiting to see what David would do next. I kept expecting his truck to appear again, the way a storm always circles back after pretending to fade. But it didn't. He vanished. At first, I thought he was giving me space, the kind of twisted silence that used to pass for peace. Then I started getting calls. A woman from the church committee asked if I knew why the pastor was asking questions about missing donations. A neighbor mentioned seeing police near David's office. And then a journalist left a message on the answering machine asking for a comment regarding the allegations. The false saint had started to fall. By the end of the week, the truth began to spill through the cracks. The church accounts, the missing charity funds, the private investments under his name. All of it unraveling in front of the town he had so carefully deceived. People who once shook his hand in admiration now spoke his name in whispers. Some defended him, said it must have been a misunderstanding. Others, the ones who had quietly suffered under his judgment, just nodded like they'd been waiting for this moment all along. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. Watching a man like him crumble isn't victory. It's the sound of justice dragging itself through the mud, messy, overdue, but necessary. Lydia and I stayed quiet, tending to Noah, keeping the house still. The calls came more frequently, people asking if I knew where David had gone. I told them the truth. I didn't. One afternoon, I went to the grocery store for the first time in weeks. The cashier, a young girl with kind eyes, hesitated before speaking. "Mrs. Hayes," she said softly, "I'm sorry about what they're saying. I know you're not like him." Her voice trembled, and I realized how many people had been touched by his deceit, how many had given him their faith and gotten nothing but shame in return. When I returned home, Lydia was standing at the window holding the baby. "They're talking about him on the radio," she said. "They say he took everything." "Not everything," I said. "He didn't take us." That night, I sat in his study. The desk was still, the air stale. I opened the hidden drawer one last time, took out the cassette tape I'd found weeks ago, and finally pressed play. At first, only static. Then, his voice, low, careful, the tone he used in his sermons. "This recording is for the records," he said. "If anything happens, they'll know I tried to protect the church." I listened, breath caught in my throat. He spoke of adjusting funds, of keeping order, of containing those who threaten God's work. And then, near the end, a pause. She doesn't understand what she's risking. He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. The tape ended with a door slamming and the faint sound of someone crying, a woman's voice. I rewound it and played it again, this time not to hear him, but to remember what power sounds like when it's finally stripped bare. It's just noise, nothing holy about it. I took the tape to the local station the next morning. The officer there, an older man who'd known David for years, looked uncomfortable when I handed it to him. "You're saying this is his voice?" "I don't need to say it," I replied. "You can hear it yourself." By evening the news had spread. His resignation was announced. An investigation began. And just like that, the man who had spent decades preaching about sin became its subject. That night, Lydia brought tea to the porch. We sat side by side, listening to the crickets. "Do you think he'll come back?" she asked. "No," I said. "Men like him don't come back. They hide." The stars shimmered faintly above us. I looked at Noah sleeping in her arms and felt something unclench in my chest. The world was still broken, but for once I wasn't the one who had to fix it. He had taken so much, my trust, my peace, my years, but not my dignity. And as his empire of lies fell around us, I realized the simplest truth of all. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I'm still here." Word count 849, awaiting OK. Você disse, OK Voices of Roteiro disse, Section 15, The Aftermath. When the news broke, people came in waves, neighbors, church friends, reporters, strangers pretending to care. Some brought casseroles, others brought questions disguised as sympathy. I accepted the food, not the pity. The truth had finally spoken for itself. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. David was gone. No one knew where. Some said he'd driven north. Others swore he'd been seen near the coast. His name filled every local broadcast for a week, then slowly began to fade. In a town like ours, scandals die when there's nothing left to gossip about. But the silence he left behind was loud. The hardest part wasn't the whispers outside. It was the ones inside my own family. My son called, his voice tight with anger. "Mom, how could you humiliate us like this?" he said. "You should have kept quiet until we figured things out." "Figured what out?" I asked. "He stole from people. He hurt them." "He's your husband," he snapped. "You don't turn on family." I wanted to tell him that loyalty without truth isn't love, it's blindness, but I said nothing. Some lessons only life can teach, and I was done begging to be believed. Grace and Oliver came to visit that weekend. They didn't ask questions. They just hugged me, their small arms wrapping around my waist, as if their love could fill the cracks. I held them tighter than ever before. Lydia kept mostly to herself. The house had become both sanctuary and exile. We didn't talk about the investigation, about the money, or about the people who now treated me like I was half victim, half accomplice. We baked bread, folded laundry, watched Noah learn to smile. Healing disguised itself as routine. One afternoon, I caught Lydia standing by the window, staring at the garden. "Do you ever feel guilty for being relieved?" she asked. "All the time," I said. "But guilt doesn't undo the past. It only keeps you chained to it." She nodded. I thought freedom would feel lighter. "It doesn't," I said softly. "It just feels honest." The following week, letters began arriving, some anonymous, others signed. Words like sinner, traitor, and Jezebel filled the envelopes. People who once asked me to pray with them now told me to repent for exposing one of their own. I burned those letters in the fireplace, one by one, watching the paper curl and blacken. Grace helped me feed the flames. "Does it make you feel better?" she asked. "No," I said, "but it stops the poison from spreading." At night, when the children were gone and the house quieted, I'd sometimes hear echoes of his voice, not real, just the memory of control. It would pass. I'd look at the small cradle near the window and focus on the sound of Noah's breathing instead. That was the new rhythm of my life, not fear, but survival. Months passed. Slowly, people stopped calling. The church replaced him with someone new. The papers moved on. Lydia started helping me manage bookings for the house. It wasn't a business yet, just a few travelers passing through, grateful for warmth and quiet. She had a gift for making people feel safe. One evening, I sat outside watching the sunset while Grace and Oliver chased fireflies. Lydia came out with Noah on her hip. The baby's laughter mixed with theirs, and for a moment, everything felt right. "This house doesn't feel haunted anymore," Lydia said. "That's because it isn't," I told her. "Haunted places aren't made by ghosts. They're made by people who refuse to leave the past behind." I looked out at the fading light and realized something simple. I hadn't escaped. I had stayed, rebuilt, and made the space mine again. That was harder. That was braver. The world might still call me the wife of a fallen man, but I no longer answered to that title. I was something else now. A woman who had learned that silence is not virtue, and that peace isn't given. It's claimed. Word count 848. Awaiting OK. Você disse, OK, Voices of Roteiro, disse. Section 16. The Business of Healing. It started with one guest. A woman driving through town, looking for a quiet place to rest. She saw the sign I had hand-painted, Rooms by the Lake, and stopped. I hadn't planned for it to be a business. It was just a way to fill the empty rooms that used to echo with sermons and secrets. But when she handed me $40 and said, "This feels like a safe house," something inside me shifted. By the end of that month, there were more guests. Travelers, widows, retired couples, women passing through on their way somewhere else. Lydia helped me clean and cook. Grace set up a small website with Oliver's help, a simple page with photos of the lake and a line that read, "A place for rest and renewal." She didn't realize how true that would become. We worked quietly, side by side. Lydia handled the kitchen, her laugh growing freer each day. I took care of the bookings and the garden. Noah's giggles filled the halls that once carried whispers. Life had found its way back in, uninvited but welcome. The townspeople started visiting too, though at first out of curiosity. They came for tea, then stayed for conversation. One of the churchwomen who used to avoid me at the market came by and said softly, "You were right about him. We just didn't want to see it." I didn't answer. Sometimes acknowledgement is all the apology you need. Every evening, Lydia and I would sit on the porch after the guests settled in. She'd hum lullabies to Noah while I watched the sun sink behind the lake. The light over the water reminded me that peace wasn't a gift. It was a choice you made again and again. Running the house gave me purpose. But more than that, it gave me proof. Proof that pain could become something useful. The same walls that once held fear now sheltered strangers who told me their own stories. Women escaping bad marriages, young mothers starting over, older travelers carrying losses too heavy to name. They came tired, they left lighter. Each of them reminded me why I'd survived. One night, after the guests had gone to bed, Lydia came to the kitchen with a glass of wine. "You ever think we're doing his job better than he ever did?" she said, half smiling. I laughed quietly. "We're doing what he preached about, but never practiced, giving people grace without expecting payment." She nodded. "Grace and cash, apparently," she joked, glancing at the day's earnings in the jar by the sink. We laughed harder than we should have, the kind of laughter that comes after years of holding your breath. Later that week, I took Grace and Oliver out to the lake. We skipped stones, baked pies, and talked about their dreams. Grace said she wanted to study psychology, to help people who'd been through hard things. Oliver said he wanted to fix things, like Grandma fixes people's hearts with pie. Their innocence steadied me. That evening, when Lydia and I sat on the porch, she said, "I still wake up sometimes thinking he'll come back." "So do I admitted. "But then I hear the baby laugh, and I remember he already lost everything that mattered." The wind moved gently through the trees. Inside the house, a guest played soft music from a distant room. For the first time, the sound didn't startle me. It felt like belonging. I realized then that healing doesn't announce itself. It sneaks in through ordinary moments, a cup of coffee, a quiet morning, a child's laughter. Before bed, I passed the mirror in the hallway and caught my reflection. My hair was grayer, my eyes lined, but I recognized myself again. Not the obedient wife, not the broken widow, but the woman who had chosen to stay and rebuild. The next morning, I hung a new sign outside the gate, Hayes Lake House, a place to begin again. Because that's what we had become, a home for beginnings. Word count, 844. Awaiting, OK. Você disse, OK, Voices of Roteiro, disse. Section 17. Forgiveness and sorority. The first real sign that we had healed came quietly. It wasn't in the money we earned or the guests who kept coming back. It was the morning Lydia walked into the kitchen humming. She didn't notice it, but I did. There was light in her again, the kind that doesn't come from forgetting, but from surviving. Noah sat in his high chair, banging a spoon against the table. Grace was helping him eat, laughing when he missed his mouth. Oliver was outside, fixing the garden gate with a toolbox that looked too heavy for him. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. My house, the one built on fear, had finally become a place of life. Lydia poured coffee for both of us and said, "You ever think we'd get here?" "Not in this lifetime," I said. She smiled. "Then maybe this is our second one." We sat on the porch steps, mugs in hand, watching the children. "Do you hate him?" she asked suddenly. I thought about it. "No," I said. "Hate takes energy I don't want to give him." "So you forgive him?" "Not for what he did," I said slowly. "I forgive him for who he was, a man too small to carry the love he pretended to offer." She nodded, her eyes glassy. "I've been trying to forgive myself," she admitted, "for believing him, for loving him. You were human," I told her. "He used your kindness against you. That's not your sin, that's his." Her tears came then, quiet and steady. I reached over and took her hand. There was no pity between us anymore, only understanding. We had been two women written out of the same lie, and together we had written ourselves back in. That afternoon, one of our guests, a woman in her 50s traveling alone, sat with us for tea. She had bruises on her arm, fading but visible. She said she'd left her husband 3 days before. Lydia looked at me, and without a word, we both knew what to do. We gave her the best room, the one facing the lake, and left fresh flowers by the window. The next morning she cried when she saw it. She said no one had ever treated her gently without asking for something in return. After she left, Lydia said, "We should make that a rule. No one leaves this house without knowing they matter." I smiled. That's a rule I can live with. Weeks turned into months, and our home became a quiet network of women helping women. Travelers left notes in the guest book, words like hope, peace, strength. Grace started keeping the notes in a box she called Testimonies of the Soul. Oliver built a swing for the porch. Noah took his first steps in the hallway where I once stood trembling with fear. Every corner of this house now held proof that pain could evolve into purpose. One evening, I walked down to the lake alone. The water was still, catching the reflection of the setting sun. I knelt at the edge and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, maybe to life itself for not letting me die in the silence I once called home. When I turned back, Lydia was standing on the porch, waving. I waved back. For the first time, I didn't see her as the woman who ruined my marriage or shared my husband's lies. I saw her as my sister, the kind the world rarely writes stories about. That night, after the guests had gone to bed, she said, "You think the world would ever understand what happened here?" "Probably not," I said. "But that's all right. The world doesn't need to understand us. It just needs to learn from us." Forgiveness had finally stopped being a word I couldn't say out loud. It had become a way of living, a quiet defiance against everything that tried to destroy me. And in the laughter of the children, the warmth of the house, and the peace between us, I realized that forgiveness wasn't surrender. It was freedom. Word count, 845. Awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay, Voices of Roteiro. Disse, Section 18, a letter from the past. It came on an ordinary morning, tucked between the bills and advertisements. The envelope was plain, the handwriting instantly familiar, careful, deliberate, the kind that used to write Christmas cards and grocery lists. I froze with the mail in my hands. It was from my son. I carried it to the porch and sat in my usual chair, the wood warm under the early sun. Lydia was inside with Noah, humming softly as she made breakfast. The lake was still. Even the birds seemed to wait. For a long time, I just stared at the envelope. I had imagined this letter 100 times, angry, apologetic, pleading. I wasn't sure I was ready to know which version it would be. Finally, I opened it. The paper trembled between my fingers. "Mom," it began, "I've been thinking about you. About everything that happened. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I know I miss you. I don't understand why you didn't just stay quiet until things settled. But maybe you did what you had to. Grace told me you're doing better, that you've started a place by the lake. She said you're helping people. I'm proud of you, even if I still don't understand. I guess I just wanted to say I'm sorry for the things I said, for making you feel alone. Maybe one day I'll come visit. Love, Matthew." I folded the letter carefully and set it on my lap. My eyes burned, but no tears fell. I wasn't angry anymore, not even hurt. What I felt was distance, not cruel, just honest. The kind that comes when two people finally stop pretending they live in the same truth. Lydia stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a towel. "Bad news?" she asked. "Not bad," I said. "Just the kind that comes too late to matter." She sat beside me. "He'll come around." "Maybe," I said, "but I don't need him to." I looked out at the lake, the water glinting like glass. For years, my life had revolved around being a mother, a wife, a caretaker, every identity tied to someone else's needs. Now, for the first time, I was enough without their approval. Grace joined us a few minutes later, holding a mug of tea. "Dad wrote me too," she said quietly. "He's somewhere out west. Said he's found work on a farm. He asked about you." I met her eyes. "What did you say?" "I told him you're happy," she said, "and that he should leave you alone." That simple sentence broke something open inside me. Not pain, but gratitude. She had become the kind of woman I once wished I'd been at her age. Later that day, when the guests had left and Noah was napping, I took Matthew's letter to the lake. I read it again, then folded it into a small boat and set it on the water. The paper floated, drifting farther with each ripple. I whispered, "I forgive you. Not for his sake, but for mine." When the paper sank, I felt lighter. Some things don't need closure. They just need release. That night, Lydia found me in the kitchen and handed me a jar. Inside were folded slips of paper, messages our guests had left. "Thank you. You saved me. I found hope here." She smiled. "I thought we should keep these somewhere safe." I placed Matthew's letter beside the jar. "Different kinds of healing," I said. She nodded. "Both earned." As I turned off the lights, the reflection of the moon shimmered across the floor. I realized then that forgiveness isn't always a reunion. Sometimes it's a boundary, the line between who you were and who you refuse to be again. And in that quiet, I finally understood what peace feels like. It isn't forgetting, it's remembering without pain. Word count, 846. Awaiting OK. Você disse OK, Voices of Roteiro, DC, Section 19, The Knock Returns. It happened on a Sunday evening. The sky was painted in gold and lavender, the kind of light that makes the world look almost gentle. Guests were sitting by the fire pit, the smell of roasted marshmallows drifting through the air. Inside, Lydia was folding laundry while Noah crawled across the rug, babbling to himself. Grace and Oliver were playing cards at the kitchen table. The house was full of sound, the kind that used to scare me. Footsteps, laughter, life. But now it felt like music. Then came the knock. A firm, deliberate knock on the front door. For a split second, my chest tightened. Years of memory pressed against my ribs, the rain, the silence, the terror of that first night. My hands froze on the dish I was drying. Lydia looked up, the same fear flashing in her eyes. Grace started to stand, but I raised a hand to stop her. "I'll get it," I said. The room fell quiet. Even Noah seemed to sense the shift. The sound came again, 3 knocks, steady, patient, the same rhythm that once promised danger. I walked to the door, my pulse steady this time. The wooden floor creaked under my feet, familiar now, no longer threatening. I reached for the handle, hesitated only for a breath, then opened it. A boy stood on the porch, no more than 6 or 7 years old. His dark hair was damp from the mist outside, his small hand clutching a bouquet of wildflowers, daisies and clovers, unevenly tied with a ribbon. His green eyes, unmistakably familiar, lifted to meet mine. "Hi," he said shyly. "Mama said these are for you." Lydia appeared behind me, her hands flying to her mouth. "Noah," she whispered, her voice breaking. The boy grinned, missing one front tooth. "I wanted to surprise you, Grandma." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The word Grandma echoed through me like a bell, soft, full, and whole. Every trace of the past, every dark shadow that once lived in this doorway, vanished in that sound. I knelt down and took the flowers from his hand. "They're beautiful," I said. He beamed. "I picked the yellow ones because they look like sunshine." "They do," I said, my voice shaking. "They really do." Lydia's tears fell freely now, her arms trembling as she reached for him. He ran into her embrace, laughing. Grace and Oliver came to the doorway, watching, smiling. It felt like the entire house exhaled at once. The last time someone knocked on this door, I had feared for my life. This time, it was love that entered. We brought Noah inside. Lydia placed the flowers in a vase while I made hot cocoa. The air filled with warmth and laughter again. He sat between Grace and Oliver, showing them the rocks he'd collected by the lake. When the night grew quiet and the children were asleep, Lydia and I stood on the porch. The air smelled like rain again, but it didn't scare me anymore. She turned to me, her face lit by the soft glow from inside. "He doesn't remember any of it," she said. "The chaos, the fear. He only knows this, us. That's all he needs to know," I said. She took my hand. "You know, for a long time I thought that note would be the end of my story." "So did I said. Turns out it was the beginning of ours. We stood there listening to the lake lapping gently against the shore. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, steady and calm. I looked back at the door, the same door that once stood between life and death, and smiled. "It's strange," I said. "Every knock used to sound like a warning. Now it just sounds like someone trying to come home." Lydia squeezed my hand. "That's because we built something worth coming home to." The porch light flickered, the night deepened, and I felt peace settle over me like a warm blanket. For the first time, the sound that once terrified me had become my favorite music, the rhythm of return, of forgiveness, of love knocking softly to be let in. Word count, 848, awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay, Voices of Roteiro disse, Section 20, Resolution, the woman who lived twice. The morning after that knock, I woke to the sound of laughter drifting up from the kitchen. Noah's high-pitched giggles mixed with Grace's teasing voice, Oliver's mock groans, and Lydia's warm laughter. I lay there for a moment, eyes open to the ceiling, and realized something that took my breath away. The silence that used to haunt this house was gone. It had been replaced by life. I slipped on my robe and went downstairs. The smell of pancakes and cinnamon filled the air. Lydia stood at the stove, hair loose, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Noah was sitting on the counter, helping her stir batter. When he saw me, he waved the wooden spoon like a flag. "Grandma, look! I'm cooking." "Yes, you are," I said, smiling. "And it smells better than any sermon your grandfather ever preached." Lydia laughed, shaking her head. "You shouldn't make me laugh with a mouthful of coffee," she said. The morning felt like forgiveness had decided to take up residence in our home. Grace poured orange juice. Oliver chased Noah down the hallway. Lydia sang, and I stood in the doorway, watching the family we had built out of ashes. After breakfast, we went down to the lake. The sky was bright, the water calm. Lydia spread a blanket, Grace unpacked sandwiches, and Noah ran in circles with Oliver chasing him. I sat in the grass, letting the sunlight touch my face. This was my second life. The first one had been built on fear, on loyalty to a man who believed power was love. The second was built on truth, fragile, earned, and infinitely stronger. People in town still talked sometimes. Some pitied me, some judged me, some called me brave. But I didn't care about the words anymore. I'd spent too many years living in someone else's story. Now I was the one writing it. Lydia lay back beside me, her eyes closed, the wind brushing her hair. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked quietly. "Not as a person," I said. "More as a warning." She nodded. "I keep wondering how something so dark gave birth to something this good." "Maybe that's the point," I said. "Maybe light doesn't erase darkness. It just proves we survived it." The water rippled gently, sunlight dancing on the surface. I reached for Lydia's hand and we sat there. Two women bound not by blood, but by the courage to start again. When we walked back to the house, Grace handed me a box wrapped in blue paper. "Open it," she said, smiling. Inside was a framed photograph, all of us together in front of the lake. Noah held a dandelion. Lydia had her arm around me. The wind caught our hair, making it look like motion frozen in time. Under the photo, Grace had written, "For the woman who lived twice." I traced the words with my finger. My throat tightened, but my heart felt steady. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat on the porch alone. The lake shimmered under the moon, and for a moment, I thought I heard the faint echo of that first knock, distant, gentle, almost tender. It didn't bring fear this time. It brought memory, gratitude, and peace. I spoke softly into the quiet. "I made it, David. Not because of you, but in spite of you. You tried to end me, and all you did was set me free." The wind carried my words away, across the water. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, feeling every part of my life, the pain, the truth, the forgiveness, the love, settle into something whole. When I went inside, the house was warm, alive, and safe. Lydia stirred in her sleep. Noah sighed softly in his crib, and the floor creaked under my bare feet. All of it real, all of it mine. Because the woman who once lived in fear had died a long time ago, and the one who remained, she lived twice. Word count, 845. Awaiting, okay. Você disse, okay, Voices of Rotero disse, conclusion. I often wonder how different my story might have been if I'd ignored that note, if I'd slipped it back into the pages of his Bible and kept pretending that faith was enough to keep the truth away. Maybe I would still be there, serving dinner at 6, smiling for people who never saw me. Maybe I would have died quietly, praised for my patience. But then I think of this life, of Grace's laughter, Oliver's courage, Lydia's strength, and little Noah's joy, and I know I chose right. That note was meant to be my ending, yet it became the beginning of everything real. There's a strange kind of grace in destruction. The things that break us are often the same things that build us again, stronger, truer. I lost my husband, my reputation, even the safety of ignorance, but I found something better. Dignity. The kind that doesn't depend on being believed or forgiven. It simply is. When people stay at our lake house now, they often ask what made me open it. I tell them the truth in simple words, because everyone deserves a place to start over. They smile, thinking it's just a motto. They don't know it's a promise carved out of survival. Sometimes I still wake before dawn and sit by the water. The lake is quiet then, the air still cool. I listen to the world breathing, to my own steady pulse, and I remember the woman I used to be, obedient, small, waiting for permission to live. Then I think of the woman I became, brave enough to walk through the fire, and gentle enough to still open her door. Lydia sits beside me sometimes, our hands brushing in silence. We don't talk about the past much anymore. We don't need to. It's there, settled, no longer sharp. The real story is here, in the peace we built, in the laughter echoing through this house that once knew only fear. To anyone listening, I want to say this. No one is too old, too wounded, or too broken to begin again. You can choose yourself, even after the world has written you off. You can rebuild from the ruins. And you can learn, like I did, that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about refusing to let it define you. I found a note inside my husband's Bible once. It told someone to kill me if I ever discovered the truth. And in a way, I did die that night. But the woman who rose afterward, she was everything he feared. Alive, free, and unafraid. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Your support helps keep these voices alive. And if you are ready for another powerful journey, click the story appearing on your screen right now. See you in the next life story with love and respect.